The world is at its most vulnerable at 3:17 a.m. It is the dead of night. The devil's hour, stretched thin, where the line between safety and terror dissolves into the shadows. In the small, fog-drenched town of Oakhaven, the clock on the wall of the Miller residence didn't just tick, it bore witness. At exactly 3:17 a.m., a silent alarm was triggered, not by a security system, but by a sudden, violent cessation of life. When investigators finally breached the heavy oak doors hours later, they didn't find a typical crime scene. They found a house that looked perfectly frozen in time, except for one room. A room where the laws of logic seemed to have been rewritten in blood. The air was thick with the metallic tang of copper and the scent of an extinguished candle. As the lead detective stepped over the threshold, his flashlight beam landed on a single handwritten note resting on the kitchen island, dated years into the future. This wasn't just a murder. It was a message sent from the dark. And the clock stopped at 3:17 a.m. was the only key to a door that should have remained locked forever. Oakhaven was the kind of place where people moved to escape the noise of the city. Nestled between dense pine forests and a jagged coastline, it offered a sanctuary of isolation. The Miller family, Thomas, a respected forensic accountant, and Sarah, a local high school teacher, were the pillars of this community. They were known for their Sunday brunches and their meticulously kept garden. To their neighbors, they were the embodiment of the American dream. However, behind the manicured lawns and the freshly painted shutters, a different story was being written. Thomas Miller was a man of patterns. He woke at 6 a.m., drank his coffee black, and spent his nights in a basement office buried under mountains of financial ledgers. Sarah, on the other hand, was the light of the house, though lately that light had begun to flicker. Friends noted she had grown withdrawn, often glancing at her watch with a look of quiet dread. The atmosphere in the weeks leading up to the incident was described by locals as heavy, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The weather that November was uncharacteristically harsh, relentless rain and a fog so thick it swallowed the streetlights. It was in this environment of damp silence that the events of 3:17 a.m. began to unfold. The night of November 14th started like any other. The Millers had dinner at 7 p.m. A neighbor reported seeing Thomas taking out the trash at 9:30 p.m., looking distracted. By 11 p.m., the lights in the master bedroom went out, but the darkness was deceptive. Security footage from a house 3 doors down, the only camera in the area, captured a faint, flickering light in the woods behind the Miller property starting around midnight. It wasn't a flashlight. It was rhythmic, like a strobe, pulsing in the dark. At 2 a.m., the temperature in the house plummeted as a side window was silently removed from its frame, not shattered, but professionally extracted. The intruder didn't move like a thief. There was no searching for valuables, no ransacking of the silver. Instead, the figure moved with a haunting familiarity, navigating the creaky floorboards of the hallway with the precision of someone who had lived there for a lifetime. As the clock crept toward the fateful hour, the intruder entered the master bedroom. They didn't strike immediately. According to forensic reconstruction, the perpetrator sat in a chair at the foot of the bed for nearly 40 minutes, simply watching the Millers sleep. The tension in that room must have been suffocating, the rhythmic breathing of the unsuspecting victims clashing with the silent, predatory stillness of the observer. Then, at exactly 3:16 a.m., the silence broke. A struggle ensued, brief but catastrophic. Sarah Miller attempted to reach for the bedside phone, her fingers brushing the receiver just as the clock turned to 3:17. At that precise second, the power to the entire block was severed. In the total, crushing darkness, the final act was carried out. When the police arrived at 7 a.m. after a wellness check requested by a concerned colleague, they were met with a psychological labyrinth. The primary mystery wasn't just who did it, but how and why. There were no fingerprints. No DNA that didn't belong to the family. The only piece of evidence was the digital clock on the oven, the analog watch on Thomas's wrist, and the grandfather clock in the hall, all stopped at exactly 3:17 a.m. As detectives delved deeper into Thomas's forensic accounting files, they found a hidden partition in his computer. It wasn't money he was hiding. It was a series of audio recordings of a voice that sounded exactly like his own, but speaking a language no one could identify. The investigation took a chilling turn when the intruder was spotted on a trail camera 3 miles away. Walking into the ocean at 4 a.m., they never surfaced. The local authorities found a wetsuit discarded on the shore, but inside it wasn't a human, it was filled with old, Yellowed newspapers from 40 years ago, all detailing a cold case that Oakhaven had tried to forget. The depth of the Miller case goes much further into the history of the town. To understand 3:17 a.m., we must look back to 1984, when a similar event occurred just 3 houses down. A young boy had vanished from his bed, and his father was found staring at a stopwatch, unable to speak a single word for the rest of his life. Thomas Miller had been auditing the town's historical land records, and it appears he stumbled upon a financial link between the modern development of Oakhaven and an offshore entity that didn't exist on any map. This entity, the Meridian Group, had been purchasing properties along the coast for decades, all following a specific geometric pattern. When investigators mapped these properties, the Miller house sat at the exact center of a perfect circle. As the detectives combed through the attic, they found hundreds of letters Sarah had written but never mailed. They were addressed to a person named Alara, a name that appeared in no birth records or census data. In these letters, Sarah spoke of a thinning of the walls and a ticking that comes from inside the mirrors. She described how Thomas would stay up all night, not working on taxes, but counting the seconds between the foghorn blasts from the harbor. She wrote about the fear that their lives were merely a rehearsal for a performance that had already happened. The psychological weight of these letters shifted the investigation from a standard homicide to something that felt like a mass delusion, or a haunting reality that the police were unequipped to handle. The lead investigator, Detective Vance, became obsessed with the timing. Why 3:17? He consulted horologists, physicists, and even occult historians. It is a moment of total electromagnetic silence. This led to a theory that the killer used this window to bypass the electronic security and the cellular network, but it didn't explain the note found on the kitchen island. The note, written in Thomas's handwriting, read, "We are finally on time. See you in the morning of 2045. The forensic team eventually found a hidden crawlspace behind the master bedroom closet. Inside was a single chair, a pair of headphones, and a series of monitors that were still warm when the police arrived. Someone had been living in the walls of the Miller home for months. They hadn't just been watching. They had been recording every whisper, every breath, and every heartbeat. The audio files found on these monitors contained the language Thomas was heard speaking on his computer, a complex, layered frequency that, when played back, caused physical nausea in the technicians. Further investigation into Thomas's past revealed he wasn't who he said he was. The real Thomas Miller had died in a car accident in 1998. The man Oakhaven knew was an imposter who had perfectly integrated into society, using his position as a forensic accountant to erase the digital footprints of a much larger organization. This organization seemed to be obsessed with the concept of temporal anchoring, the idea that certain events in time can be locked into a loop if the conditions are precise enough. The 3:17 a.m. murders were not an ending, but a reset. Neighbors began to report strange occurrences in the months following the tragedy. Some claimed to see Sarah Miller standing in her garden, perfectly still, even as the rain poured down. Others heard the sound of a typewriter coming from Thomas's basement office at 3 a.m. every morning. But for the people of Oakhaven, the case is far from over. The town council recently voted to demolish the Miller house, but the demolition crew walked off the job on the first day. They claimed that every time they struck the walls, the sound that echoed back wasn't wood splintering, but the sound of a clock ticking. A heavy, rhythmic beat that synchronized with their own hearts. One worker suffered a nervous breakdown, claiming he saw his own face looking back at him from the shadows of the empty master bedroom. As we look at the evidence today, we are left with a terrifying mosaic. We have a family that was perhaps never a family at all. We have an imposter who spent decades playing a role. We have a town built on secrets and iron-rich cliffs that distort reality. And we have a specific moment in time, 3:17 a.m., that acts as a gateway for something we cannot name. The mystery isn't just about the blood on the floor or the note on the counter. It's just about the feeling you get when you wake up in the middle of the night and realize the silence is a bit too loud. What did the investigators really find? They found a void. They found that beneath the surface of our reality, there are gears turning that we aren't meant to see. The Miller case is a reminder that the people we know, the houses we live in, and even the time we keep are fragile constructs. When the clock strikes 3:17, those constructs can shatter, leaving us exposed to the dark. The trial that never happened looms in the minds of the townspeople. Many wonder if the killer was even a person at all, or a ghost of a debt that Thomas Miller couldn't pay. The house remains empty today, the windows boarded up, But neighbors swear that on the 14th of every month, the power in the neighborhood flickers at the exact same moment. The shadows in the woods seem to move closer to the porch, and the sound of a ticking clock echoes through the silent streets. Who was the figure at the foot of the bed? What did Thomas find in those ledgers that cost him his life? And most importantly, what happens when the clock strikes 3:17 again? The truth may be buried in the Oak Haven archives, or perhaps it's still watching from the tree line, waiting for the next house to go dark. Some secrets are meant to stay in the vault, but the scream that echoed at 3:17 a.m. still rings in the ears of those who dare to listen. The police report remains open, but the lead detective retired shortly after, refusing to speak a word about what he saw in the master bedroom. He only leaves one light on in his house at all times, a small flickering candle, just like the one found at the scene. He knows that the darkness doesn't just hide things. It hungers for them. And in Oak Haven, the hunger is never quite satisfied. Even now, if you walk past the Miller house, you might feel a sudden chill, a drop in temperature that defies the season. You might hear the faint sound of a woman's voice calling out a name, or the rhythmic thud of someone walking on floorboards that no longer exist. The mystery of 3:17 a.m. isn't just a case file. It's a warning. It's a reminder that we are never truly alone, especially when we think we are safest. The investigators found the bodies, they found the note, and they found the stopped clocks. But they never found the why. And perhaps, for the sake of our own sanity, it's better that way. Because some answers are more terrifying than the questions themselves. The dark holds its breath, the clock waits, and the cycle continues in the heart of the Midnight Crime Vault. This case remains one of the most baffling anomalies in modern criminal history, a haunting blend of the physical and the metaphysical that leaves more questions than answers. Was it a calculated hit or something far more sinister? The files are thick, the theories are many, but the silence is absolute. As we close this chapter, we invite you to look at your own clock. Is it ticking? Is it moving forward? Or has it already stopped? The shadow in the corner of your room might just be a shadow. Or it might be a visitor waiting for 3:17. In the world of true crime, the most dangerous stories are the ones that don't have an ending because they are still happening somewhere in the dark. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows of Oak Haven, make sure to subscribe to Midnight Crime Vault for more bone-chilling true crime stories that the world tried to forget. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a midnight upload. What do you think really happened at 3:17 a.m.? Was it a person or something else entirely? Let us know your theories in the comments below.